Yeah. Okay, so I will focus my talk on the relationship between community of practice and responsible data production and linkages, relying for this on the example of a collaborative multi-year project I'm coordinating on crop diversity management in West Africa. So I'm the main author of this presentation and responsible for the content of it, but I've benefited from input from a whole range of colleagues from different disciplines, and I will be also reflecting on concrete experiences in terms of data production and data collection and data analysis coming from this project from these different colleagues at different moment of time of this project. And let me say also upfront that I will be presenting here something which is a new terrain for me. For those who know me, I'm coming more from a global policy or global governance perspective, and I thank Sabina and Hugh to have pushed me to explore this different aspect of governance than the one I'm used to. And actually, this allowed me to make a connection, nice connection between things I was previously managing separately. So starting from there, so the FAIR principle in terms of data governance provide a very powerful tool to facilitate data sharing and enhancing the stewardship in plant science. But there are also a number of criticism for the lack of integration of ethical dimension and the possible epistemic injustice their implementation could generate. And there are different discussion in the literature about that, and that's why usually we add the E after to reflect on the ethical dimension of the FAIR principle. And here the orientation of this talk is to look at, to explore to reflect on the notion of community of practice as a way to try to reintroduce the agency and reflexivity in data governance to help and to see whether it could help to address the challenge of responsible data production and linkages. And for that, let me start by reflecting on the notion of community of practice, and I will be quite brief about that, since this became a kind of umbrella term since its inception in 91 by two researchers, Leiv and Wenger. And actually, beyond the richness of this literature about community of practice, we can distinguish two main understandings of community of practice. And I will not present them chronologically, but rather in terms of importance. Since the one that is really predominant in the literature comes from the knowledge management literature, in which the community of practice is seen as a kind of an entity, an organization that requires some managerial efforts to initiate, to develop, and to cultivate this community of practice. And then it's really more as a kind of organizational mechanism through which knowledge will be held, transferred, and created. And the management of knowledge and dependency will be mainly done through technology-mediated tools, standards, and protocols. And in that case, the learning is really a matter of psychological construction and acquisition by individuals who happen to be collocated in the same community and the same organization, but it's still very much individual-centered. And the knowledge and data are constructed as outcome and products. In the learning literature, which preceded this conception of, from the knowledge management literature, and which was actually the initial notion that was coined by the two authors, Leiv and Wenger, is to see here the key word is really practice rather than community, where practice is considered as the source of knowledge. And learning in that case is really about making meaning making through a collective production process that is negotiated through different participation and social interaction over time. So learning is really related to situated activity. And here, by contrast to the knowledge and data, the important aspect is the process, the knowing, as a process of participation in a shared learning activity and social processes for knowledge construction. So in the case of the project I was referring about crop diversity in West Africa that I'm coordinating, which is called CoEX here. So we've established this collaborative project that was built up as a kind of collective and multi-actor inquiry on the diversity of crop diversity management system in West Africa with 4 different countries. And we've gathered researchers from very different disciplines, as well as also non-academic partners like farmers organization and NGO, with the overall objective to try to provide a more accurate picture, actually, of the actual practices surrounding seed acquisition, seed uses, and seed exchange, and to try to move away from the overly simplified binary vision, which still predominates, especially in the policy world, but even in the academic literature, between the so-called formal seed system or formal innovation system and the so-called informal seed system. So for that, we've collected different type of data during this project that was mainly coming from social science discipline, and probably the one that that I will specifically put emphasis on during this talk is the second one from the bottom, the blue one, about survey data and focus group data in anthropology on crop diversity, seed acquisition source, and seed use. But we've also collected data on collaboration modalities, on also previous projects to try to conduct some meta-analysis, on knowledge management, on sociology and economics, and also about seed use and circulation norms and practices. So now I will move to the different challenges in terms of implementing or in terms of dealing with data production and linkages within this community of practice. And actually the first one is what we've called the socio-cognitive challenge. And here the idea was to, in line with the learning literature understanding of community of practice, CoEX tried to explore the plurality of ontology related to seed and variety through the diversity of practices producing knowledge about seed. So, and that allowed to actually challenge existing categories that was taken for granted, such as land races or improved variety, from a very practice-oriented view, as the status of those seeds evolve through the circulation of seeds among actors and over time, obviously. We've also, and this pushing even further the characterization of practices, we've also explored the diversity of relationship actors have with the seeds, as well as the plurality of status and values associated with the seeds within the community. And that allowed to put focus on new data dimensions that are usually left out in existing knowledge system and database about seed and seed system. And those new data are on the relational dimension, the emotional aspect like pride, hope, collective history, emancipation, or the moral dimension like fidelity, loyalty, reliability, solidarity of the seeds. Those dimensions are usually not really described, despite their critical importance to the perception of fairness and equity in the management of crop diversity dimension between seeds and humans. Now moving to the political challenge, and here the idea was to try to go beyond the harmonious bias associated with the managerial conception of community of practice that tends to omit that actually knowledge actors rarely share complementary or compatible motivation and objective in relation to those specific objects. There are like highly different motivation and objective and also institutional logic that coexist within a community of practice that are not necessarily made always explicit or transparent to others in the course of the knowledge production. And besides, we know that the seed sector is also a highly politically charged environment that surrounds this plant science and breeding, that forced to actually even be more cautious about meaning production and power differential among actors. That's why we've tried to create really the here to conceive learning as, and we try to take care of this collective meaning production in the course of the research process. And for that, actually, this took place specifically within one task. Sorry, yeah. Could you see well my screen? Or yeah.
Yes, we can see the map. If you could kind of bring it to a close in the next minute or two, that would be great, Salim.
Okay. So yeah, so I will probably skip that, but here it was interesting to see that we've tried to collect data at a very large scale, but for that we need to make sure that people see the same reality about what we were collecting, and for that we've really tried to develop different mechanisms to build this kind of collective meaning. Anyway, so I will move to the second challenge, the reflexive governance in terms of the second political challenge. And here the idea was to conceive CoEX as a unit of action, a collective experiment that take up the question of the condition for its own collaborative context, to set up its own collaborative context, instead of relying on administrative routines pre-established. And for that, in that case, governance, the establishment of collective rules for data sharing, for instance, was conceived as a knowledge and learning area. And for that reason, all collective action problem, their resolution was part of the collaboration process and the collective inquiry process. So that's the reflexivity. And so the three main messages, and I will finish probably with, I have still one slide after that, but I will then skip those the three main messages coming from those three different challenges and move to the conclusion, which is that the issue of responsible data linkages is here conceived as a way to produce data that makes sense to and reflect the reality experienced by the member of the community of practice. And that's why we've insisted in the collaborative dimension in implementing the FAIR principle beyond only the technical one. And obviously, this asks the question whether this is only applicable because we were dealing with small data versus the more kind of challenging global significance of big data approaches. But here the point I think we are trying to make is that scaling up data is not just about making data bigger by expanding the geographical scale and managing technically the interoperability through standards, but it's also, it should include the governance dimension and more specifically the way collective learning is conceived. So thank you very much, and sorry for the rush at the end. Here are the three messages that I've skipped. Hopefully you can read them.